Hi, I'm Lexi Brewer with the Denver City Forester's Office in Denver Parks and Rec. Thank you so much for tuning in to our second episode of Water, Trees, and Life. If you saw our first episode, we talked about how we've integrated nature into the city. In this episode, I'd like to branch that out a little bit further and see how building this city and the process of that has been integrated into our natural environment and what impact that has on the surrounding ecosystem. We'll talk again to 3 area experts about the water, trees, and life that we find here in the city. For our first stop, we'll actually head up to the Denver Mountain Parks, a unique and fascinating part of our Denver Parks and Rec system. We'll speak with Shannon Dennison, our Mountain Parks expert, to find out how the Denver Mountain Parks actually help to preserve and promote our water quality here in the city.
So the Denver Mountain Parks was established in 1912, which makes it even a little bit older than the National Park Service. And at that time, Denver was known as the Queen City of the Plains, but it was on the plains. It had a great view of the mountains, but it wasn't in the mountains. So at that time, they decided to establish a mountain park system. People could get up into the mountains and recreate, where it was a little bit cooler in the summertime, and also so that Denver could help protect some of the really important watersheds that provide water for the city of Denver. Right now we are at O'Fallon Park, which is in one of the Denver Mountain Parks, and we have Bear Creek here in the background. You know, most people are familiar with Washington Park or Civic Center Park and are surprised to find out that Denver also has 14,000 acres of mountain parks in the foothills and mountains west of Denver as well. Popular parks like Red Rocks Park and Genesee, where we have bison herds, but we also have some of these really cool little jewel parks along Bear Creek Canyon. Evergreen Lake is a Denver mountain park. You can also go up to Mount Evans, which is one of the highest paved roads in the United States. So people can drive above tree line, and it's one of the few places that you can get to the top of a 14er without having to hike up to the top. Summit Lake is actually the headwaters of Bear Creek. And so the waters from Bear Creek flow, and they originate from Summit Lake, and then they flow down the mountain. A watershed is just a way to describe where the water comes from and where it goes. So it's the path of the water. So the water flows out of Summit Lake Park down into Evergreen, and from there and from Evergreen Lake it flows down into Bear Creek Canyon, where it flows through Kittredge, Idledale, and some of these beautiful mountain parks like we're in right now. And from there it flows down out of the foothills near Red Rocks and into Bear Creek Lake Park, which is owned by the city of Lakewood. And then the Platte River flows through Nebraska and then eventually meets up with the Mississippi and goes into the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a pretty extraordinary watershed. Having a healthy forest creates healthy water. Denver Water puts a lot of money and time and effort into creating healthy forests across the Rocky Mountains so that we have healthy drinking water in the city of Denver. In a healthy forest and a healthy ecosystem, we look for more larger trees and fewer small trees, because if our forest gets too overgrown, we get really damaging wildfires. So wildfire is a natural part of the ecosystem. We live in a fire-adapted landscape, in a fire-adapted ecosystem. So the trees in the forests are used to fire, and they require fire to be healthy. Because we can't have lots of wildfires in a highly populated area anymore, we have to go through and we have to mechanically thin the trees, which means that we have to go in and we have to cut down the small trees to sort of duplicate what a fire would do. In a healthy forest, a wildfire would come along, you know, on a regular interval, and it burns away a lot of the really small trees and a lot of the undergrowth. It doesn't hurt the larger trees because they have thicker bark and they're adapted to fire. So they can survive it, whereas the little trees get burned up and they go away. And so in a healthy forest, you have much, much larger trees and not as much undergrowth. Over time, when you start suppressing fire in the ecosystem, and fire can't come through and clean out all those smaller trees, you get lots and lots of little tiny trees that grow up really close together. They crowd each other out. None of the trees can get big enough to really be strong enough to survive a fire, so that when we do get a fire that comes through, it just races through and it takes out almost everything. What happens then is that everything burns up and we get major floods that can be a big problem. With no vegetation to hold the sediment in place, it rains and we get catastrophic floods that flood the waterways and flood the watersheds. After the Buffalo Creek fire, there was about 40 years worth of sediment that came out of a single flood after a wildfire. So it clogged up the waterways, it killed the fish, It clogged up all of the reservoirs, and it took Denver Water a couple of months to be able to clean all of that out and restore water service and to be able to make that a functional reservoir again. Fire ecology is fascinating. We've learned over the last many decades that fire is really important, and if we don't have fire in the landscape, we don't have a healthy forest. And if we don't have a healthy forest, we don't have healthy water. And if we don't have healthy water in Denver, then we don't have anything to drink. As long as we have healthy water here in Bear Creek, upriver, as it flows down, it'll help create a healthy ecosystem for the beavers, for the birds, for the foxes and coyotes that also make Denver their home. I think we have a lot of people that come to Denver with an expectation of being in the West. And one of the really amazing things about the Denver Mountain Parks is that we have all these amazing icons of the American West, these iconic landscapes, iconic animals, bison, the national mammal, Rocky Mountains, we have subalpine lakes, we have Buffalo Bill and the Museum and Grave, we have strong American Indian history, we have beautiful watersheds and these beautiful Rocky Mountain rock faces and beautiful streams coming through, and it's only 30 to 45 minutes from Denver. One of the reasons that the Denver Mountain Parks were established is so that Denver has mountains in its backyard. So it's a pretty cool system.
Wow, what gorgeous parks! And I can't believe they're so close to our city. I can't wait to explore them more. For our next stop, we're actually going to head back to Denver in order to find out what it takes to build an urban forest. We'll talk with one of our community partners from UC Denver, Sylvia Leon Guerrero, to find out more.
I'm trained as a landscape architect and a city planner, and I have this particular focus on urban design. So I'm very interested in parks and cities. There are many benefits to trees in Denver. They clean the water, they clean the air, they help with climate change by sequestering carbon. But they also provide a lot of benefits to people in this urban environment. So there are studies that show that they calm traffic, so they reduce traffic speeds. In commercial districts, they can improve business outcomes. There have even been correlations to reduce crime on tree-lined streets. By reducing the temperature, they help with this thing called the heat island effect, basically by shading and cooling the city. Which can help reduce ozone, and they also absorb ozone. They also are studies that show that they reduce stress, that green environments in general can help health overall for people. There are studies showing that people recovering in hospitals, if they have trees outside their window, will actually require less pain meds and recover faster if there's trees as opposed to like a brick wall. Yeah, so trees are pretty fabulous. They provide a lot of benefits. The City of Denver in their Denver Right plan has a couple of goals. One is a 10-minute walk to parks, and there's also this vision of the city as a city in a park, which really entails tree-lined streets. And so I wanted to see, well, what is it like basically to walk to parks in Denver? I was looking at let's start smaller at that 5-minute walk, which is about 1/4 of a mile. Is there a place to walk, and are there trees? What kind of access do people have to parks, and that walkable access, which is really the measure of how you get to a park. There are some parts of Denver that have really great tree-lined sidewalks, and there are other parts that don't. About 40% in that 1/4 mile distance again around parks will have less than 20% canopy along those streets, along those sidewalks basically. And a good portion of that 40% is actually in Southwest Denver. We're here today in Harvey Park. It's a beautiful park in Southwest Denver, but it's also one of the places that has fewer trees in that 1/4 mile watershed, only 8% tree canopy along those sidewalks. I think it would be wonderful if this watershed could become something like the watershed around Wash Park. A place like Marion Parkway is pretty fantastic to walk down to get to Wash Park. And if you could imagine that Marion Parkway, if you've had the pleasure of walking down it, imagine it without trees. It would be a completely different place. And I think some of the streets around here, they could be really transformed by just planting those trees along those sidewalks to get here to Harvey Park. And I think, making it more likely that people will continue to use their parks on a regular basis. They provide all kinds of benefits, so making them more accessible by just making it easier to walk here. With the unfortunate ash borer problem, there will likely be an opportunity to replant, and so hopefully replacing the trees that do succumb to the ash borer. Planting for diversity really helps the resiliency of the urban forests. I'm hoping that my analysis will help Denver really improve access to parks, to really make they're more walkable, because being more walkable improves access, and improving access particularly in parts of the city that have this low tree canopy but also fewer resources. So kind of prioritizing those areas for additional tree planting. Making a city more walkable and making parks more accessible, I think, is particularly important in the time that we're experiencing all right now during the pandemic. I think we've all really come to understand how important parks are. I think it would be hard to find someone who hasn't taken a walk to the park in the past 3 months.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, and our other community partners that help us to bridge the gap that we need to help promote a resilient and sustainable forest here in the city. We have limited capacity to have all of this research, and so we rely on our community partners in order to figure out what the best planting plans can be. So through these planting processes, we're trying to promote resiliency in our urban forest. An important part of that is making sure that we're preventing the spread of emerald ash borer, and you can help us with that as well. So the Denver City Forester's Office is actually giving away free trees to qualified residents. You can go to our website at beasmartash.org to find out more and to apply for a tree and see if you're qualified. As you're looking and maintaining the trees on your property, please always remember to use a licensed and insured tree care professional. You can also visit our website at denvergov.org/forestry to find a licensed tree care professional as well. You may be surprised to know that we actually have beaver right here in the middle of the city. We went down to Bear Creek with Vicki Vargas-Madrid to look at our beaver population.
So we're at Bear Valley, Bear Creek corridor in Denver, and this corridor serves as wildlife habitat for a variety of wildlife species. And it's a riparian area that's managed by Denver Parks. However, it's used by, of course, our park users, but also by a variety of wildlife species. Wildlife use all of the riparian corridors in the city and county of Denver, such as South Platte River, Bear Creek, where we're at today, Westerly Creek, Highline Canal. They build their homes in these corridors. They use the water, they use the plants, they use the cover and the shelter that the habitat provides. Without these corridors, we probably wouldn't have the variety of wildlife that we have in the city. And you may be surprised that the city of Denver has more variety of wildlife species than the mountains do. The American beaver is a native to North America. We are so fortunate to have beaver in the middle of downtown Denver throughout these riparian corridors. So if we have water, most likely we have a population of beaver. We have beaver dams that they have created because the habitat has provided them all that they need: food, water, shelter, and space. Reservoirs of water that are created by beaver dams create a complex habitat for other wildlife to use, such as fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds. We probably didn't create this habitat intentionally for beaver, but it has provided them all of their needs, which is why they are here. These wonderful cottonwoods that we have along the riparian corridor, this is what beaver use to build their dams, to build their lodges, to survive through the winter when they build their food caches. Denver Parks has also created more habitat in the sense of more plantings, planting more trees, a more diverse variety of trees, and planting more vegetation along these corridors, primarily to attract people, for people to enjoy. They do create some conflicts with people, with our park users. For example, when beavers create dams, there are times where some of those dams can cause flooding on trails or into areas that people recreate in. And because of that, as a wildlife ecologist for Denver Parks, we have to come up with tools and ideas on how to mitigate the beaver activity. There are a variety of things that we do. Protecting a tree or trees or a grove of trees that we believe are important to that ecosystem. To do that, we'll paint trees with a mix of sand and paint that is unattractive to beaver. So we'll come in and we'll paint those trees that have already been chewed on and discourage the beaver from continuing to chew on those. Or we'll wrap the trees with wire to protect the tree from additional damage. When we wrap trees, we know that there's plenty of habitat in that corridor for beaver. So it's okay when we do that because there's plenty of vegetation and other trees for the beaver to utilize in that corridor. What they're doing when they're munching on all of these trees and plants within a riparian area, they're actually encouraging further growth and thicker growth in those areas. Their presence is very important, and as a park agency, it's important for us to come up with ways and mitigate their activity so that we can all benefit from their presence and they benefit from us.
Thank you all so much for learning with me and tuning in to Water, Trees, and Life. If you'd like to help us with our planting plans and promoting tree diversity in the city, please visit our website at beasmartash.org to see if you qualify for a free tree.